Welcome to the Faith is Not Blind podcast. I'm Eric Devonier, and I'm here with Zach. Welcome, Zach.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for being here. First, Zach, we just want you to introduce yourself just a little bit.
Sure. Okay, so my name's Zach Marshall. I was born in the northeast of England, born and raised in the church. My parents are big believers. I think my dad was a convert when he was about 9, and my mum was a convert as a teenager. And it never really resonated with me as a kid. I kind of left home when I was 19 to go and pursue studying architecture in London, and then a career in architecture. Never really involved with the church up until about 7 or 8 years ago, when certain events in my life culminated in a decision to come back to the church. And I met my wife 4.5, 5 years ago here in Utah, and that's why I'm in Utah now, because my wife is from Bountiful.
Yeah. Wow. So started off with, growing up in a household where you'd mentioned that your parents were big believers.
Yeah.
So what was it like growing up in your house, and then why didn't it resonate with you when you were younger?
Yeah. Pinpointing the reasons for where I was at is difficult. I mean, I think my upbringing was an immersive one. I think my dad was the stake president already when I was born, and he worked for CES his whole life. He was employed in his 20s as a area director in seminaries and institutes, and my mother's big believer. Like, we did everything that kind of a good LDS family would do. They were militant about family home evening. Although my dad was a busy guy, like, he always made time for the family, and we always did things together as a family. And even as a stake president, I remember we would go around to the different wards with him as a family. And so we were really kind of quite connected, and the church was really central to that home that I grew up in.
Yeah, really, really central to the home, but it sounds like not as central to you.
No, I found it quite strict.
Sure.
And it didn't really suit me.
Yeah.
And why? I was just really selfish, really self-centered, and I wanted to do stuff. And I saw. I just saw those rules as inconvenient blockades from me doing the things that I wanted to do. And I never really, even as a young child, I never really saw it as anything but that. And so I would do whatever I could to break those things down to do.
And was that hard? I mean, did that cause a lot of conflict between you and your parents?
Yeah, I was constantly in trouble.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was as a child and a teenager. The church just never really resonated with me. Like, people have asked me, like, how did you view your relationship with God, say, as a child or a teenager? I didn't. I just didn't. Maybe there was some kind of belief in that because of my upbringing, and there was something very natural kind of in me that maybe there was a level of belief, but I certainly didn't address it in any way.
And so then at the age of 19, you were able to sort of get outside of the barricade, as it were, right? and you go down to London to study architecture.
Yeah.
And so you're down there and you study for how many years was it? Or how long were you down there?
So quite a long time. So I started my bachelor's degree in '96. That lasted 3 years. Then did a year out in the industry, and then did my master's at the Royal College of Art in 2000 to 2002, and then just stayed down there because I'd already built up a network of contacts down there, and it just didn't make any sense to leave London. There's a lot of development going there.
Right.
So I stayed there.
So how does the church and the gospel of Jesus Christ come back into your life?
You know, this is a really interesting one because, I mean, hindsight's a lovely thing, isn't it, with the hand of God? Because when you're in it, it just feels awful. But when you look at your life in hindsight, you can kind of pinpoint certain things, and I think there were lots of things, and to sort of say it was any one of them in isolation would be would just be kind of missing the story. Sure. But certain things happened that, and when I can see the ordering of them, I can't help but see the hand of God in them.
So what's an example of one of the smaller maybe moments that you had?
Okay, so what happened was in 2008, 2009, there was a big recession, and construction industry in recession tends to be kind of the first to get hit and then the last to sort of pick up again. There were a lot of my friends down in London who were fine in their jobs. They were working for these big firms, and they kind of took the hit of the recession. I worked for a small firm that I started working at in 2005, and that folded in 2008, 2009, and everything started to go bad. Girlfriend dumped me. Job went. Wow. Couldn't pay the rent. And it was just these series of events. Like my whole life just started to collapse, and I was just like, okay, what am I going to do? And I called my parents and I said, look, this is the reality of what's happening in my life. I think I'm going to have to come back and stay with you guys for a bit. And I hadn't done my Part 3, which is the architecture professional qualification, by that point. And so my intention was, I'll go back home, I'll start studying for Part 3 and just use this as an opportunity to just knuckle down, live with my parents and focus on Part 3. And then I moved back down to London. And that whole kind of time back home with my parents actually turned into getting my Part 3 and getting to know the architectural kind of professional side of things a little bit better, but it also became about getting to know the Saviour a little bit more as well, in a way that I hadn't expected.
Yeah, because you know, there you are going back into, you know, jumping back over the barricade, right? back into, you know, living with your parents again. You're older now. You've been living in London for a while. Yeah. So what was it when you were back home that helped you feel the Spirit, that helped you maybe recognize some things you hadn't seen when you were younger?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few things. I had friends who were back at home who kind of interested in the same things that I was as a teenager, and who had already returned to church. And I think kind of connecting back with them was a big help. But I think that there was this kind of defining moment when I was just looking at things on YouTube to do with the church, probably quite negative things to do with the church. And YouTube kind of takes you on this journey, doesn't it? It kicks in the next video that it thinks you might like, if you like that. Right. And it ended up on this this video or series of videos, which was all about evidences of the Book of Mormon. I think it's important to kind of note that the way that my head worked, I think, right up until that point was very logical. Like, if you can't give me a rational explanation for it, I'm not really that interested. It's a bit pie in the sky, and I can't access it, you know. And which is why that video was really appropriate at that time, because they had all sorts of kind of anthropologists, linguists.
So it sounds like YouTube got to know you.
There's also all sorts of experts talking about, it is amazing the way YouTube gets to know you. But they had all sorts of experts just talking about the evidences of the Book of Mormon, and it was really powerful, because it was just like, I can't really kind of watch that and then not read the Book of Mormon. It would almost be like a denial of seeing that. and I recognise that
Yeah.
as it would be a lie to myself if I didn't at least engage with the Book of Mormon. It was almost like a feasibility study.
Right.
It was almost
right.
like, okay, reading the Book of Mormon is feasible to me now because you've just shown me something that I find compelling. What's interesting is I no longer find those videos that compelling. I find them really dubious, but I found real truth in them then
Right.
at that time.
So there was something. It gave you, regardless of maybe how you might feel about those now. At that moment, it gave you a compelling reason to read, right? And so what was that reading like when you got back into the Book of Mormon? How did that feel as you read it?
I mean, I don't think I'd ever read the Book of Mormon on a personal level before that time. We did as a family, but I never really engaged with it. It was just like, I'll just read a verse because then we can shut this and go to school and get on with life. But no, at that time it was like, okay, I've got to take this seriously. And because of my position professionally, and I was still in the process of kind of looking for work and working through my professional qualifications, I just said, right, I'm just going to take a week out. I'm just going to read the Book of Mormon.
Wow.
And so I read the Book of Mormon in that week, and then I went to church the following Sunday. I don't think I missed church since. So it was very quick, and it was very just really powerful. Like in ways, like the video I watched was interesting because that was all about, is the Book of Mormon authentic?
Right.
As a historical record, and obviously there's so much written about the Book of Mormon, but I think we know as members of the church that the power of the Book of Mormon comes in the experience of reading it,
right?
And it can't be about; it has to be it.
Yeah.
And there were just certain points in the reading when, like for the first time ever, I was able to liken some of those stories to myself. Like the Sons of Helaman was a big, very powerful experience for me, because it kind of became irrelevant. So much the history of those people.
Right.
All of a sudden, I could see myself, and I could see a relationship with my mother, through that story of the Sons of Helaman.
Yeah.
And that was a very kind of, I think, a very pivotal moment in my conversion, because I kind of saw that the reason why I was there reading it was because of that testimony of my mother.
Yeah.
And I'd never really prayed for myself before. I knew that I was there because of the prayers that she had offered up on my behalf.
So that almost becomes, it just sort of helps you understand, maybe to some extent, the strictness of what was going on, the reason the church was emphasized so much, and maybe maybe it wasn't the way that you would prefer, the way that you run your home now, but you could start to experience a little bit of the why your parents did what they did.
Oh yeah.
And that just sort of made it become real.
Yeah.
One of the things I loved
Absolutely.
that you said, talking about those Mormons, about the Book of Mormon videos, was you said it's not about the book, it's it itself.
Yeah.
And it seems like, maybe some of the rules and some of the things we do as members can sometimes almost feel like it's about things.
Yeah.
Whereas really what we're trying to do is have an experience with God, himself, and an experience with the atonement of Jesus Christ and with the Holy Ghost.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. That's, and I see it as a little bit of a problem, like, because we talk about the doctrines of the church, and it's kind of like the doctrines of the church are just a set of, what am I trying to say? I suppose unless they're kind of animated in our lives, that they don't really exist.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They're just an idea,
Right.
and unless the idea is tested, it's still just an idea.
Right.
which is why I like the idea of the feasibility study. I mean, it's like a design process. You can see what I'm doing. It's kind of like in the architecture design process, you have this feasibility study where it's like, okay, is this a viable thing to do? Which is, I suppose, with the videos that I saw. And then when you start the design projects, you need some ideas. And those ideas come up. But the only way those ideas will ever reach fruition is if they're really rigorously tested. You know, and that's precisely how I see the doctrines of the church. That unless they're tested, they're futile.
Right. Yeah, and speaking of being tested, so there you are as an architect.
Yeah.
And then you experience this conversion, and you move over to Utah. You meet your wife in England.
Yeah.
And your life, I mean...
Well, I met her here, actually.
You met her here?
Yeah.
So tell me, what would you describe as the difference between your life now and the life you had 20 years ago?
Oh, it's just worlds apart.
Yeah.
Like, completely worlds apart. Yeah, I think yeah, obviously I'm a lot happier than I was then. Yeah, I'm not just kind of, this is what I want to do, so this is what I'm going to do. There's something, it's really odd, isn't it? It's like, is it like a paradox? Is it like a contradiction? I'm not sure, where you kind of, now I see that life is incredibly restrictive. It's like the whole thing, it's gone like vice versa.
Right. So it feels less restrictive now.
Oh, much less restrictive.
Compared to that life that you had, just 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's a world of opportunities now,
yeah,
I would say. Yeah, definitely.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story. We appreciate it.
No problem.